what's even more amazing is that McSorley also happened to be filming at the time and caught it from her own perspective.
Buckle your safety belts, turn on some Highway to Hell, maybe watch a little bit of Final Destination, the one where the logs came in through the car windshield and eviscerated those white people. I mean white women, not better. Because today it's time to get our tree and freak on. Let's do this.
Chris Gersi. If you're an adrenaline junkie, hang gliding might be your thing, but you might want to think twice after seeing this.
Yeah, fuck him up. Oh shit. Yo, he riding too loose. Don't grab my under thigh, bitch. I'd have kicked him off. Get off me, bitch.
The man you see here clinging desperately to prevent himself from plummeting to his death is Florida Auto Parts manager and photographer Chris Gersi.
Nope. Back
in 2018, Gersi was vacationing in Switzerland when he decided to give hang gliding a go for the first time.
Nope.
Little did he know
he
it
wouldn't
was
have made
almost
it.
the last thing he'd get to do.
See,
Gerski's instructor forgot one crucial thing: hooking Gersi onto the glider. After taking off from a 4,000-foot mountain ledge, Gersi had to hang on for an agonizing 2 minutes and 14 seconds as the pilot desperately tried to steer with one hand to get him safely to the ground. Thankfully, the pair were able to make a safe landing, and Gersi walked away with a torn left bicep tendon from hanging on and a fractured wrist from the force of the impact when he hit the floor.
Damn.
After uploading the jaw-dropping footage of his ordeal online, Gersi said he wasn't angry at the instructor and would even give hang gliding another go. That's one seriously brave dude.
No, I'm not that brave.
Koutu Shaw.
I'm not that brave.
Animal attacks are no laughing matter.
I'm not that brave. Oh.
And if there's one creature you don't want to face off against, it's a 400-pound polar bear.
In armor?
Just ask Koutu Shaw. In September 2003, 46-year-old Shaw was working as a guide on a hunting trip in Koutu, Canada, when things took a grisly turn. In the early hours of the morning, Shaw and the captain of the Yucalik Hunters and Trappers organization awoke to find that the ceiling of their tent had been shredded as they slept. At first, it looked like the tent had been filled with snow, but as their bleary eyes adjusted, they realized it wasn't snow. It was the white fur of the perpetrator, which was now looming over the men. The captain immediately started running, and after failing to find a knife in the tent, Shaw joined him. But the fearsome polar bear was hot on their heels. Shaw was about 4 paces behind the captain, but then the unthinkable happened.
Because when it really goes down, I don't have to outrun the polar bear or whatever's chasing us. I just gotta outrun hopefully fat ass. And that's why it's good not to discriminate on the size of people you take with you on camping trips. If somebody's gotta go and you gotta lighten your camping load, it might as well be the big people. What? It's not gonna be me. I literally can't let it be me. Those are the rules.
He tripped on a small rock, and before he knew it, the 400-pound beast came down
right in his ass.
The polar bear dragged Shaw towards the ocean, then gouged its claws into his back and sunk its ginormous teeth into his head. Just when it looked like it was game over for Shaw, the group's cook grabbed a gun that belonged to one of the American sport hunters and shot the bear twice, killing the animal. Amazingly, Shaw never lost consciousness.
Damn.
When they finally reached the ER, 3 handfuls of sand were removed from the blood-clotted area around his skull, which may have saved his life by slowing down the bleeding. After 13 hours of intensive surgery, Shaw walked free with a new nickname in Kemerut, the Polar Bear Man.
Oh boy.
Chris Lemons.
Nope.
In September 2012, Edinburgh-born saturation diver Chris Lemons was working in the North Sea, diving from his ship, the Bibi Topaz, and a diving bell to repair oil rig structures. One fateful day, Chris was lowered 91 meters in a diving bell alongside colleagues Dave Yusa and Duncan Alcock to fix a pipe on the seabed at the Huntington oil field east of Peterhead and Aberdeenshire. But this was almost one trip he didn't return from. During the repair, Chris heard an alarm sounding in dive control, which meant getting out of the structure and back to the diving bell as quickly as possible. What the men didn't know was that the ship was moving away thanks to a failure in the computer which kept it in position. Then disaster struck. Lemons' umbilical cable became snagged on part of the metal structure. This not only tethers divers back to the diving bell and the ship, but also provides them with breathing gas, hot water to keep their suits warm, as well as light and electricity.
Oh no!
With the 8,000-ton boat pulling in the opposite direction, and Lemons basically acting as a human anchor, there was only one outcome. The umbilical cable snapped, plunging him 100 meters down towards the seabed.
Oh,
without it, Chris
yeah.
only had about 5 minutes of emergency gas stored in a set of normal diving cylinders on his back. He managed to find the structure they'd been working on and climbed on top of it, but the diving bell wasn't there, and he'd already used up about 2 to 3 minutes of gas. The clock was ticking, and Chris accepted his fate and blacked out. His colleagues put in a superhuman effort to locate him, but they were expecting to find a body, which is exactly what they thought when they found Chris laying on the floor of the rig. But after being hauled onto the diving bell and given 2 breaths, Lemon sputtered to life 35 minutes after he had turned on his emergency supply of air.
What?
With nothing to breathe for that long, Chris could have easily suffered brain damage, but the gas they breathe has a high concentration of oxygen, which saturated his tissues and cells to allow him to survive. In just 3 weeks, this extremely lucky guy was even back working with his team again.
No!
Coolidge Winsett. Popping to the toilet to drop off some timber probably isn't at the top of your list of potentially life-threatening situations. But you can never be too safe. Just ask Coolidge Winsett. Winsett is a 75-year-old retired janitor and World War II veteran who lives in the very same home he grew up in Southwest Virginia. The problem is the property hadn't changed much over the years and there was no indoor bathroom. Just a rickety old outhouse Winsett had built himself back in 1950. That didn't bother old Winsett. He'd been using it for years, and he didn't think twice about paying it a visit one hot afternoon in August 2000. But while Winsett sat minding his own business, literally, the rotting floorboards below finally gave way, dumping the retired veteran into the filthy pit below. Luckily for him, he was able to stay afloat after landing on the remains of the floorboards, which acted like a makeshift raft. Unfortunately, Winsett had already been partially paralyzed by a stroke and was missing part of one leg, leaving him well and truly stuck. As time ticked by, the 17-year-old mailman, the only regular visitor to Winsett's property, noticed that the mail had started piling up, so he decided to investigate. Luckily, he discovered Winsett after following his weakened cries, and the old man was rescued by the fire department after 3 whole days in the pit. Now that's one seriously crappy ordeal.
Oh, hell no.
The Robertson Family. On the 27th of January 1971, the Robertson family from the village of Merebrook in Staffordshire, UK, set off from Falmouth, Cornwall on a voyage to parts unknown. Retired merchant naval officer Dougal Robertson had purchased a 43-foot wooden schooner called Lucette, which would be perfect for the educational adventure he had planned for his wife Lynn, 18-year-old son Douglas, 17-year-old daughter Anne, and twin sons Neil and Sandy, both 9. Over the next year and a half, the family sailed across the Atlantic, stopping at different Caribbean ports and taking in amazing sights all over the world. But on the 15th of June 1972, the family encountered a pod of killer whales near the Galapagos Islands, which launched an attack, damaging the boat beyond repair. The family, plus a student hitchhiker they'd picked up named Robin Williams, managed to scramble on board an inflatable lifeboat and dinghy. Once stranded, the group got by for 6 days on a few rations like biscuits, dried bread, onions, and fruits, but they eventually resorted to hunting turtles to eat and collecting rainwater to drink. After 16 days, the inflatable raft became unusable, so the 6 people crammed onto the 10-foot-long dinghy called the Edna, taking it in turns to sit in the dry part of the boat. Finally, on the 23rd of July 1972, 38 days into their trip on the Edna, they were picked up after a Japanese fishing trawler named the Tokomaru II spotted their distress fire. Next time you fancy some family bonding time, just stick to the Scrabble.
Nigger.
Ruy Mahamadu. As far as car accidents go, this one has got to be something straight out of a nightmare.
What?
This spine-chilling photograph was taken in March 2014 after football player Ruy Mahamadu, who plays for Johannesburg's Orlando Pirates, had a narrow brush with death on the highway. Mahamadu had been driving his BMW 3 Series when the car slipped on a wet patch of road, causing him to lose control. Before he knew it, the entire vehicle was impaled by a guardrail that pierced the windscreen and exited through the back, all while miraculously missing the driver himself. Onlookers were shocked to see Mr. Mahamadu walk away from the accident without a single scratch on him. Someone up above must really have been looking out for him that day. And if that wasn't quite Final Destination enough for you, take a look at this total nail-biter. It's hard to imagine surviving something like this, but one lucky motorist in Western China is living proof that it can be done. In 2015, the unnamed man was driving to Chongqing when he heard a loud bang come from the opposite lane. Before he had time to process what was happening, he spotted a huge circular blade bouncing through the bushes of the central reservation, which then smashed into the front of his vehicle. Highway police said a truck had crashed in the opposite lane and the saw blade had been thrown off and into the road. The driver may have escaped unharmed, but this 50-centimeter gouge is one scratch that isn't going to come off too easily.
That's scary as hell.
Margaret Guire. Margaret Guire was a British national from the city of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, Canada. She was just 26 years old when she married Reverend Herbert Guire on the 15th of April, 1915. Less than a month later, the pair boarded the RMS Lusitania in New York, bound for Liverpool. But little did she know Margaret was about to star in one of the most bizarre survival stories of all time. On May 7th, just 6 days after leaving the port, the Grand Ocean liner was torpedoed by a German submarine while Margaret and Herbert were at dinner. Not long after the impact, the lights went out and mass panic set in as the boat began listing badly to starboard. Herbert escorted Margaret to a lifeboat and helped her in along with 3 other women and a baby. But what Herbert didn't realize was that, as Margaret looked up, she thought the ship's smokestacks were going to fall on the lifeboat and quickly clambered back on deck. Meanwhile, Herbert hopped into another boat and began to row away. But when the deck Margaret was standing on slipped beneath the water, she desperately tried to swim away from the quickly sinking ship. Unfortunately, she didn't make it very far until she was sucked into a violent whirlpool and down into the funnel of one of the smokestacks along with 2 other men.
Damn.
This should have spelled the end for Margaret, but Lady Luck had other ideas. By some miracle, an explosion in the boiler room directly below the smokestack blew Margaret right out of the funnel and back to the surface. Margaret was rescued by a nearby lifeboat and quickly spotted her husband, who was sobbing over her loss on another boat nearby. At first, he didn't even recognize Margaret because she was so covered in soot.
She's black.
When the pair were reunited at last, Margaret composed herself and said, "Never mind, we've lost those awful wedding presents." She must have been some woman to still have a sense of humor after being fired out of a sinking ship. Beck Weathers. Climbing Mount Everest is a notoriously tricky feat. Thousands of successful mountaineers have reached its towering peak of 29,029 feet, but more than 300 others have lost their lives while trying. Even when using bottled oxygen, mountaineers can experience fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and other problems like hypothermia and frostbite during the climb. Back in 1996, 49-year-old Beck Weathers, a pathologist from Texas armed with all the confidence of a midlife crisis, decided he would take on the challenge. On May 10th, he and his team were due to summit the mountain when Weathers started losing his vision at around 28,000 feet. See, he had undergone a corneal operation not long before attempting the climb, and the high altitude had rendered him half blind. The guide decided to continue the group's ascent, promising to come back for Weathers on the way down. Although passing climbers offered to help him back, Weathers refused and decided to wait. Did I mention that this area is grimly known as the Death Zone? Because it's littered with the frozen, mummified bodies of other failed climbers? After some time, the wind picked up and a dangerous blizzard rolled in, dropping the temperatures to an unfathomable 90 degrees below zero. Weathers then decided to begin the climb back alone, but got bogged down in the storm. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was deranged with hypothermia and lack of oxygen, and his right arm was frozen solid. At this point, the guide made the difficult decision to leave Weathers behind. The next day, doctors came to examine him. They chipped ice from his face and broke the news that he was just another casualty of the infamous death zone. But in a Hollywood-style twist, he later awoke from his coma. Finding himself covered in snow, he stood up and walked back in the direction of camp. When he arrived, it's safe to assume the other climbers probably mistook him for one of the White Walkers from Game of Thrones. Weathers was airlifted and taken to Kathmandu, where he lost his right arm from the elbow down, as well as his nose. Despite his ordeal, Weathers recovered fully and went on to become a motivational speaker. Hopefully, he also went on to take on a far less deadly hobby than mountain climbing, like cross-stitch or something. Joe Simpson. This tale of 2 British climbers sounds like the stuff of folklore, so it's no surprise it was turned into a best-selling book, a documentary, and a UK theater show titled Touching the Void. In spring 1985, 25-year-old Joe Simpson and 21-year-old Simon Yates became the first people to scale the west face of the Sula Grande mountain in the Peruvian Andes, which is almost 21,000 feet high, FYI. But what should have been a moment of total celebration quickly turned to one of terror and very nearly tragedy. While the pair were making their descent, Simpson plunged down an ice cliff, breaking his right leg. As night fell and with a storm rapidly closing in, the two men were forced to continue in the dark with no way of communicating and almost 150 feet of rope separating them. While battling blizzards, avalanches, and frostbite, Yates chose to try and lower Simpson down the mountain by rope 300 agonizing feet at a time. He had already lowered him some 3,000 feet over an icy precipice when the snow seat he was using for leverage started to collapse. Suddenly, Yates was faced with an impossible decision. He couldn't see or hear Simpson, but he knew they were both as good as dead if he continued to hold on. So Yates took a knife and cut the rope, sending his climbing companion plunging to an early grave. Or so he thought. You see, Simpson had already fallen 100 feet into a cavern of snow and ice below. He was sure he was done for, but he somehow managed to muster the strength to crawl an immense journey of 6 miles to make his way back to base camp. 3 days later, Simpson arrived just in time to be reunited with Yates, who was just packing up to leave. Even more remarkably, Simpson showed no bitterness towards Yates, and has even said in the years since that he is sure he would have made the same decision if the roles were reversed. What a class act. The million-dollar question is, would you cut the rope to save yourself if it meant sacrificing a friend? Let me know how you think you deal with such a moral dilemma down in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious. Now, where were we? Angela Hernandez. This story sounds like one of those nightmares you have when your body jolts you awake with full-fledged terror and you can't ever go back to sleep. It all started on July 6, 2018, when Angela Hernandez was driving her white 2011 Jeep through the Big Sur area on her way to Southern California. Suddenly, Hernandez spotted a small animal in the road ahead and swerved to miss it. But this act of compassion would cost her big time. Hernandez's car veered off the edge of a cliff, plummeting 200 feet below to where the ocean meets a rocky beach that is completely isolated from the road above. When Angela next opened her eyes, she was still inside her car and she could feel water rising over her knees. Although every bone in her body hurt, she was able to remove her seatbelt and use a multi-tool she kept by her seat to smash the driver's side window. Then she jumped into the water and swam until she reached the shore, where she blacked out again. When she next woke up, it was still daylight. As she surveyed her surroundings, Hernandez saw nothing but rocks, the ocean, the sheer cliff above her, and her car, now half washed up on the shore and the roof ripped off. She had no shoes, and her jeans were ripped to shreds. As her grim reality became apparent, Hernandez scoured the shore, sunburned, dehydrated, and screaming for help, but no one on the road could hear her. Up above, the authorities were searching for Hernandez, who had been reported missing while traveling from Oregon to California.
Damn, she cute too.
But it would be 7 whole days until her ordeal was over. During that time, Hernandez used a hose from her car to catch water dripping from moss on rocks. When Chad and Chelsea Moore spotted a discarded car bumper and followed the trail of debris to find the rest of the wrecked vehicle, they knew something was up. When the couple walked up the beach, they found Hernandez hidden in the rocks and called for help. She suffered a brain hemorrhage, 4 fractured ribs, and a fractured collarbone, a collapsed lung, and ruptured blood vessels in both eyes, among other injuries. But above all else, she was grateful to be a lucky survivor.
Come on, Titty.
Jenna Geese. Freak accidents aren't the only things humans are able to overcome with remarkable luck. Just ask Jenna Geese. When she was 15 years old, Geese was attending Sunday Mass at her local church in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, when a bat started flying around inside. After an usher stunned it by hitting it with a prayer book, Jenna, being an animal lover, picked it up by its wings and carried it outside. And that's when it sank its fangs into her left finger. You might be thinking, people have survived bites from far more fearsome creatures. But this wasn't just any old bat. It was a rabid bat. For those who don't know, rabies is a nasty viral disease carried by certain animals which can kill a human by compromising the brain's ability to regulate breathing, salivation, and heartbeat. The disease is virtually 100% fatal. Thankfully, there is a vaccine which can be administered to stimulate antibodies to the virus. The vaccine eliminates the chances of getting the disease if it is given in advance, or more commonly, within a few days after the initial exposure. There was only one small problem. Geese didn't get the vaccine. The bite was so quick and small that she thought she had only been scratched. Plus, her fellow churchgoers told her only healthy bats could fly, meaning she thought she was safe when it flew away. But 3 weeks later, Jenna noticed that her finger felt a bit numb and tingly. Within a couple of days, she felt tired and nauseous. 24 hours later, she was seeing double and was taken to the hospital, where she arrived semi-delirious and vomiting. Her parents were told she had hours to live. After all, no one had ever survived rabies without a vaccine before. Left with no other choice, Dr. Rodney Willoughby came up with a totally impromptu treatment. He put Geese into an induced coma to give her immune system time to build up antibodies against the virus. A week later, she was slowly brought out of the coma and remained in the hospital for a further 11 weeks, during which time she took 17 pills a day to help her recovery. Full rehabilitation took months to a year, but doctors have since described Geese's survival as historic. In the years since, Geese has been outspoken about her battle and hopes the doctors can refine the experimental treatment to ensure that other victims are given the same chances of survival. Moral of the story, don't go scooping up bats, kids, especially if they've just been smacked by a prayer bug.
Be careful. Don't pick up random animals.
A whale of a time.
Oh no.
On Monday, the 2nd of November, 2020, friends Liz Cottrell and Julie McSorley were kayaking at California's Avia Beach when the unthinkable happened. The pair had been watching whales feed on silverfish from a distance of about 9 meters when a large pool of fish emerged around them. McSorley then spotted a large, dark shape coming up from beneath, but it was too late to react before this happened.
No.
Damn.
Did anyone else just gasp out loud?
I've seen that story, and seeing that is still scary as hell.
It's like watching a real-life Moby Dick, except this time, thankfully, there's far less tragedy involved. It may look like Liz Cottrell and Julie McSorley were swallowed by this huge humpback whale, but both women actually escaped totally unharmed. As the whale burst out of the water, it lifted the pair and their kayak up into the air before dumping them back down. It's incredible that a nearby kayaker was able to record the entire thing on camera, but what's even more amazing is that McSorley also happened to be filming at the time and caught it from her own perspective.
No.
I don't know about you, but she sounds awfully calm for someone who was almost swallowed by a whale. Thankfully, most whales, with the exception of the sperm whale, have throats that are too small to swallow a large mammal the size of a human, and there's no records of such a thing ever happening. Assuming you were swallowed in one piece, the whale wouldn't be able to tear you to pieces because whales don't have teeth, so to speak. Instead, they have baleen plates, which are covered with hair that is able to filter krill from the thousands of liters of water these huge creatures swallow in one gulp. The biggest danger would either arise from being squashed by the whale's sheer weight or being dragged down too fast enough to a depth where your lungs experience a thoracic squeeze and collapse completely. Thankfully, these ladies only lost their car keys and not their lives. I hope they called a cab home because I'd be in no rush to get on another boat.
Can't do
Lisa
no boat.
Mondi. Ever get that uneasy feeling while swimming in the ocean like you're mere feet away from a great white at any time? Thankfully, those fears are usually just thanks to your brain playing tricks on you. In fact, according to the International Wildlife Museum, the odds of being attacked and killed by a shark are around 1 in 1.75 million. Those chances are lower than the possibility of dying by a lightning strike, a freak firework accident, or excessive cold. But not everyone is safe. Just ask Lisa Mondi. In March 2011, 24-year-old Lisa was a wildlife tour guide making the most of a sunny lunch break by wakeboarding with friends when she failed to land a jump and the board came off her feet. Lisa started treading water as she waited for the boat to turn around and pick her up when a great white shark sped straight up at her from below. The creature hit her so hard it launched her about 3 feet out of the water as its powerful jaws closed around her head and arm. The shark dragged Lisa underwater, but lost its grip of her, and thanks to her life jacket, she was able to come back up to the surface. Lisa was then rushed to the hospital in Port Stevens, where doctors feared they would have to amputate her left arm because she had lost so much muscle, as well as her brachial artery, which is a major blood vessel. Miraculously, after undergoing numerous operations, she was able to leave the hospital with her arm heavily bandaged up, but crucially, still attached to her body. Even more remarkably, Lisa returned to the water in February 2016 to get a closer look at the predator that almost killed her by going cage diving.
No.
Oh, and did I mention she also smashed a performance of Strong by British band London Grammar on X Factor Australia in 2015? What a survivor. Ron Cooper's lucky escape. Regardless of how much of an experienced driver you are, the open road is full of pitfalls and perils. And if it isn't other drivers you need to be wary of, it's your natural surroundings. In 2014, Australian motorist Ron Cooper proved that sometimes all it takes is lightning-fast reaction times to save your own life. While traveling on the Blackspur Highway near Melbourne, Australia, Cooper was caught in the middle of a wild storm. Dashcam footage shows the trees that line the road swaying slightly as Cooper turns a corner, and leaves and small branches litter the road ahead. And then this happens.
Damn, nature, you scary.
As if blown over by some invisible giant, at least 7 trees fall like a house of cards, right in front of Cooper's car. Thankfully, he was able to think fast enough to slam on the brakes before any of the falling foliage could crush his vehicle, not to mention himself. A car driving in the opposite direction can also be seen stopping just in the nick of time as the trees cover Watts River Bridge. Judging by the footage, Cooper managed to miss the trees by mere inches without breaking a sweat. All it would have taken is a split second more, and this freak weather accident would have certainly spelled lights out. And that, my friends, is a much needed lesson on being aware of your surroundings at all times. Alides Moreno. If you're afraid of heights, window washing probably isn't the right career choice for you. But Alides Moreno and his brother Edgar clearly had no such fears, as they worked together on high-rise buildings in Manhattan for years. That is until one fateful day in December 2007, when the obvious risks of such a vertigo-inducing career became a terrifying reality. While cleaning the windows of the Salao Tower, an Upper East Side apartment building in Midtown Manhattan, the anchors holding the platform that the two brothers were working on suddenly gave way, sending it and them plummeting 47 stories,
oh my
almost 500
God,
feet into a narrow alleyway below. This kind of fall should have been game over for anyone, and Edgar sadly lost his life in the accident. But as stunned witnesses rushed over to the scene, they were dumbfounded to find Alides miraculously alive, conscious, and sitting up. After being rushed to the hospital where he underwent several tricky procedures, as well as receiving around 24 pints of blood and 19 pints of plasma, Alides was amazingly able to walk and talk again by the following June. But how did he survive such a fall? Alides has since referred to his job training to explain it. You see, he and his fellow window washers had been given clear instructions about how to try and protect themselves in the event of falling from a great height. Just lay flat and grip the platform tightly. Doctors also noted that he didn't hit his head or break his pelvis upon landing, which are two things most likely to cause fatal complications in a fall like this. Unsurprisingly, Alides wasn't able to return to his window washing work, but he did receive a sizable settlement after it was revealed that the scaffolding company hadn't secured it properly. Plus, who else can say they've fallen 47 stories and survived?
Fuck.
A damn disaster. The Montello Dam is a 304-foot-high concrete arc located on Koutu Creek, where the stream crosses the eastern boundary of Napa County, California. It was constructed between 1953 and 1967 to form Lake Berryessa and regulates flows along the lower reaches of Koutu while storing surplus water. But its crowning feature by far is a magnificent spillway known as an Morning Glory Hole, which acts as a massive funnel when water levels rise above 440 feet. At the surface, the spillway measures a whopping 72 feet across.
Like the
Excess
devil's
water
anus.
drops a monumental 200 feet down a narrowing shaft, which tapers to 28 feet in diameter, where it turns 90 degrees and flows into Puto Creek. As you can imagine, falling into this watery chasm isn't something that most people would escape from unharmed. But that's precisely the scenario laid out in descriptions that accompanied a video that made the rounds online in November 2020.
Why would you do something like that?
The video's description claimed the unfortunate soul fell directly into the Montello Dam in California after being used as a human springboard, with the clip cutting off right before we get to see their fate. But I'm relieved to tell you that, in reality, that terrifying looking tumble wasn't quite what it was claimed to be. You see, despite the video's claims, the location wasn't the Montello Dam at all. It was the far less dangerous Sapua Dam, found in India, which is a prime spot for camping, sightseeing, and swimming. The name Sapua translates as snake, which reflects the winding architectural structure of this concrete dam. Although the viral video's camera angle makes it look like the guy fell to certain doom, the reality is that he probably only fell around 18 feet into the water below, which is nothing compared to the 200 feet had he really been at California's Montello Dam.
I've been thinking about that.
If anyone were actually unlucky enough to fall into the Montello spillway after being sucked into the abyss, they'd likely be battered around the tunnel walls, possibly even drowning in the turbulent current. But while no injuries were reported in relation to the viral video from India, the fellow's fall still could have turned nasty had he got unlucky and struck his head on the dam's concrete masonry. So although the viral clip might not be as terrifying as it once seemed, and its subject was alright, it's safe to say that hanging around any dam is a damn bad idea.
I ain't even gonna lie to y'all, the scariest thing in the world to me is dying by drowning, man. I don't trust water, never really have. Oh my God, oh boy. Yo, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe. It's your boy BlastphamousHD. Twisms.